People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. A tele-reminder from Teleradyo Marcelo, ang telearalan ng bawat Malulenyo.
Manood na sa teleradyo, makinig, manood na sa teleradyo. Teleradyo, Teleradyo Marcelo. Sa gitna ng mapanubok na panahon, magkahatid sa kakibat ay diskusyon. Sama-sama tayo, kahit magkalayo. Sa programang ito, tiyak ang pagkatuto. Teleradyo, Teleradyo Marcelo. Teleradyo, Teleradyo Marcelo. Teleradyo, Teleradyo Marcelo.
Good afternoon. My name is John Lester Zamora, your reading and writing skills teacher, here live at Teleradyo Marcelo, ang telearalan ng bawat Malulenyo. Nice to see you again, although I cannot really see you, but you can see me, and that counts for something. Once again, I am ready to learn, and I hope you are as well. And explore new things with you. So I would like to acknowledge the grade 11 students that we have here from STEM, ABM, and all the other strands, since I don't want to mention them all. So, all right, thank you for tuning with us here at Teleradyo Marcelo. Please stay because we will begin in just a few moments. Welcome to the continuation of the Teleradyo series of reading and writing skills. I learn. Enough with the introductions. Let's get right to it. So to start, let us have a review of what was discussed from last week's broadcast. So that's what we're going to talk about first. Kindly comment your name and section as well as your answer so that you may be recognized. Again, what was last week's discussion about? While you are typing your answers, please do not forget, if you haven't, please do not forget to like the Marcelo H. Del Pilar National High School Facebook page and subscribe to the YouTube channel of Teleradyo Marcelo. All right, without further ado, let us look at what you had last time. So from STEM D, we have an answer from Shireen K. Mangaran. We have claims of policy. That's correct. You had claims of policy. So Maureen Patayan from STEM D. Ronaldin Pagtalunan, you are here. There was no answer. All right. Claim of policy. Claim of policy. Thank you for participating. Now, for last week's discussion, you were able to discuss or talk about or learn about claims of policy. You were able to listen and interact about this specific type of claim, the claim of policy. So, according to Susan Oakes from Lumen Learning, a claim of policy argues that certain conditions should exist or that something should or should not be done to solve a certain problem. That's the kind of claim that it is. So, Uh, all right. So that's the type of claim that it is. Of course, there are signal words such as should, which can be seen in claims of policy. So simple examples of claims of policy may be, for example, smoking should be banned. That is a claim of policy because you're asking for something to be done. Or the Philippines should use its arbitration ruling against China, for example. Or baseless red tagging by public officials should be criminalized. Something like that. Something along those lines. So now, as I discuss what we are about to do next, can you give your own examples of claims of policy in the comment section below? All right, let's get right to it. While I'm talking, please comment examples of claims of policy that you can produce on your own. All right. So for the next part, I am going to show you several quotes, mostly misinterpreted by people who use these quotes, especially on social media. This will be important later, trust me. So I shall read these quotes twice, and you will type your answers as to what these quotes mean. But before that, let me read your examples regarding claims of policy, if there are any. Has anyone uh, commented or answered what claims of policy they can produce? So, what examples of claims of policy can you make? Kindly answer them. All right, from Lovely Joy Balbero, we have divorce should be legalized. That's a good example of a claim of policy, and it has the signal word should. So if you want something as a solution to a certain problem, like for example, divorce may be a solution to certain problems like domestic abuse, for example. So it only makes sense that examples such as these can happen. So for example, murder should not be legalized from Maureen's from STEM D. Murder is not legal in the first place, but that's all right. There are legal ways to murder, I guess. When you implement death penalty, I guess that's legal murder. From Sean Marco Viray, everyone should stay home during quarantine. That is a claim of policy. And then you have from Russell James Balastigue, divorce should not be legalized. All right. All right. Final answer that I'm going to read. The national government should charge bullying with financial compensation. That's a school policy, but if the national government acts for it, I guess that's fine. It's still a claim of policy. All right. So thank you for participating. I have more questions, so keep participating. All right. As I have said a while ago, I will read quotes that are usually misinterpreted. All you have to do now is tell me or tell us what these quotes mean. So I'm going to show you what does the following quote mean. So I have here a quote from the Bible. So all you must type is what you think the quote means. So as I read this twice, tell me what you think this means. So from Philippians chapter 4 verse 13, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Again, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. In other versions, of course, it says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. With Christ, of course, pertaining to Jesus Christ. Now, let us see your answers. What do you think does this quote mean? I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Anyone from any section in this comment section? All I see are attendance answers. All right, we have from Adonis Carillo from 11TVL8. I think you can do anything if you have supporters that are always by your side. All right, so I guess that's one interpretation. From Russell James Balastigue again, I can overcome trials and hardships in life through Jesus Christ. From Ray Ann, you can do everything as long as God is with you. All right. So this is the usual interpretation. There is no problem, of course, with your answers. Thank you for. We have Moises Atienza. With Jesus, I can do everything. That's how it is usually interpreted. Now I'm going to show you something else involving the same quote. So the thing is, people often quote this absent-mindedly or mindlessly as an excuse to say that Jesus Christ or God, if you are a Christian, supports their efforts and that they of course can do anything with God's help, just like your answers. It is good to have that confidence, to think someone has your back all the time, of course, because most of the time you really do not have anyone. Nothing wrong with a little self-comfort, right? However, it is a misinterpretation if we isolate certain ideas from the original text. So the preceding text before the verse says, I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And finally, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. That makes it very different when it comes to meaning. So the first isolated edition and this one are very different. Of course, this alludes to the Apostle Paul's struggles and how we should live in any and every situation instead of the isolated version, which means God will support you with whatever you want to do, which expresses desire as opposed to contentment, which means if you quote something that is that has some parts missing, that means the meaning might change. All right, I think you get the point. I think you get the point of this exercise. So I have two more examples. Let us do another one. So here's the next quote. Again, same procedure. Same procedure. Tell me what you think is the meaning of the quote. I see people from grade 12. Why are you here? So, all right. Here's the next quote. I think here is the next quote. What do you think does it mean? So type in your answers below. Or if you're using a laptop, I think the answers are to the left. So great minds think alike. Again. So as I wait for your answers, great minds think alike. What do you think does this mean? Usually, this popular quote is used by people who, of course, believe in the same ideas, principles, or values. Do you agree that great minds think alike? Let us read your answers. I'm not from Moises Atienza. Me and Einstein think the same. That's one way to interpret it. Cyrus Mendoza, with being smart, your ideas will be others' ideas too. Pauline Faith Evangelista, intelligent people have same ideas or same views about the topic. From is this Neana Therese Cardenas? I'm sorry if I pronounce your name wrong. I know it's very important to you, your name. All right, from 11 STEM H. It suggests that intelligent people think like each other. And finally, from Aurelia, I think, 11 STEM A. People with the same level of basic knowledge usually has the same way of thinking. So the meaning of this is very simple. If you interpret it this way, if you're familiar with the quote, of course, usually you might have used the quote in one of your experiences of having the same ideas with a classmate, for example. But since I think you're familiar with how this exercise already works, since we're following a series of misinterpreted quotes, this one is also mostly misinterpreted because the rest of the quote is missing. That the complete quote says, "Great minds think alike, but fools rarely differ." Or in other versions, fools seldom differ. The meaning of the previous one is very different because it suggests that conformity or thinking like others is a sign of intellect, while the other one suggests that we should be cautious or careful about conforming to certain values or ideas. That is a much better message, is it not? So let's proceed to the last one since I think I'm taking too much time with this introduction. All right. So we have the following. So for the last sample quote, we have this which is mostly used to put ideas and words on a pedestal. The quote is, "The pen is mightier than the sword." What do you think does this mean? So type your answers below or to the right. This is a tricky one because I think we agree with the statement since many of our institutions are expected to promote non-violent means of solutions instead of violence, since that's the opposite of non-violence. So, uh, all right. Or are you one of those people who support violent solutions coming from people in power? I sure hope not. So let us read your answers. We have from John Mark Borlongan, "You are a grade 12 student, but I will read your answer. The pen is mightier than the sword" is a famous adage speaking about the power of writing. A pen can achieve a lot more than a sword does. It means that the power of writing is eternal while the power of the sword is short-lived. This is why it is said that a pen is mightier than the sword. All right, from Yori Kuong, "Writing is a more powerful and a peaceful way compared to violence." From Maureen, "Intelligence is better than violence." From Sean Marco Viray again, "Solving things through peaceful and diplomatic means is more effective than violence." All right. Sorry if I don't read more of your answers because we can't accommodate everyone. But yeah, since those interpretations are of course correct if you only consider this idea, but since we are following a series of misinterpreted quotes, this is the complete quote. So to explain this further, the complete quote is, "Beneath the rule of men entirely great, the pen is mightier than the sword." That sounds different because there is something else that is given emphasis. So the act of the pen, such as public opinion and resulting legislation, is not separately mightier than the sword. Only under the condition that the government itself is under capable leadership first, which does the act of the pen yield the positive results implied by the quote. So think about that one the next time you quote, "The pen is mightier than the sword." So the point of this exercise is to show you that there are many ideas that we randomly share without taking a specific thing or idea into account. Sometimes we read and take things literally, putting our reading comprehension at a very low level. So to advance to a level where you can analyze and not take things as they are, you must take something into account. And that is context. Context is not really our main topic for today, but it is necessary to understand what context is so that you can advance to the next level. I'm sure you have heard of the term context in the past, but before we start, let me show you our standards and objectives since that is important. So for our content standards, you should be able to realize that information in a written text may be selected and organized to achieve a particular purpose. That is important in finding out about context development as well, because depending on the purpose that you have, the more it will shape the different interpretation of the context. Next, performance standards. So what are you supposed to do when you do your performance task? For our performance standards, which is what is expected of you when you perform, of course, you should be able to critique a chosen sample of each pattern of development, focusing on information selection, organization, and development. Those points are important in finding out context as well. So, now this is the most important part, probably, because this is your target. So for our learning competency, you are expected to identify the context in which a text was developed. We are about to discuss two important terms here: context and intertext. And finally, here are our objectives. By the end of the session of this broadcast, you should be able to firstly define context and intertextuality. Value the purpose of recognizing intertextuality among context development. And finally, write the intertextual connections of texts that you have read. All right. Now that our objectives are clear, let us talk about context. Context, if you look at this slide, is defined as the social, cultural, historical, and other related circumstances that surround the text and form the terms from which the text can be understood and evaluated. The context in text development serves as a connection uh, of written or spoken texts, which instantly links with a word or passage that clarifies the meaning of that particular text. So just like in our previous examples, if you did not know about the background and took those quotes as they are, you would probably be part of the many people going around social media and misrepresenting the meaning of certain quotes. Understanding the use of context in text development provides meaning and clarity, of course, to the intended message. So this context creates a relationship between the writer and the reader, not a romantic one. And this helps to communicate one's point of view and makes it easier to understand and appreciate the message of a text. So if this is usually present in memes, for example, if you do not understand the context of a meme, you will not understand it. That's why uh, there is a generation gap in humor between Generation Z and baby boomers probably. So if I say for example, ang online class ay gawa-gawa lamang ng Illuminati, it for a person who does not know the context of that, they will not probably find it humorous. But for someone who recognizes that it is a joke, the interpretation is different. So, all right. So the only people who dislike knowing about context are jerks because they do not care about understanding anything, especially when it is too bothersome to look at another person's point of view. So don't be a jerk. Next. So in discovering a text's context, sorry if I'm talking a lot, but later you will participate. You may ask questions like, when was the work written? So this entails the history of the work. So for example, if you simply interpret Noli Me Tangere as a story about a young man's efforts to change certain things in his society, you will miss the point if you do not consider the historical background, which is part of the context. Next, what were the circumstances that produced the work? So is it an autobiography? Is it a diary? The meaning of the text is enriched greatly by these background details. Finally, what issues deal with the work? Was it produced during a time of slavery? Or in the text, how are the poor portrayed? How are women treated in this certain novel? How about the members of the LGBTQ plus community? These backgrounds enrich meaning instead of just letting us interpret things literally. But why do you need this? So how can you be helped by knowledge of context? So I have certain points here. So context helps you to firstly realize the decisions that you are making regarding reading. So including the key decision of whether to read something in the first place. If you know about the context of something, it's easy to know whether you will read it or not depending on your purpose. Like for example, when I check papers, when I check papers or students' works, if I read a copy pasted story in my students' papers, I will not read it because the context is very obvious from the beginning lines. I mean, if you are asked to write an original story and then you're using characters from a well-known a well-known movie, you are being too obvious. Next. All right. When you're aware of the context of what you are reading, you can select the information that you need to focus on. If you are reading a novel, for example, you have to be careful compared to reading an essay, which is usually interpreted and understood at face value. So, for example, in an essay, you can skip to topic sentences and supporting details if that's what you're looking for, depending on the information you need, compared to reading a novel, which you have to take slow and digest because you will not process what you have read properly because it's deeper to understand. So, next, following that, I'm sure you've encountered this. We have the ability to figure out difficult words. Have you ever encountered a word without knowing the meaning? Yet you understand the entire sentence because it just makes sense with the sentence. That is called context clues. You have encountered that since elementary school. That is why we do not need to discuss context that much since it's only about background of what is written in a text which is necessary for you to understand. I said that we should not discuss context, but I already took 30 minutes of this discussion. So, proceeding to the next benefit for you. And of course, if you read, uh, is this all right? You can monitor if you're reading if it is accurate. Because without the knowledge of context, your interpretation of the text is limited. It will only be about that, of what your base level of knowledge is. And next point. And of course, if you read without any idea of what the context is, you would be similar to a person walking inside a cave without a flashlight. So you know that you are entering a cave without any idea what is inside as you step in. You cannot probably appreciate the rock formations and the bats waiting for you there. So that's the best that I can come up with as a picture, but you get the point, I hope. So without context, you are bound to misinterpret things such as the people who carelessly share quotes on social media. However, since we are really here to talk about intertextuality, which I mentioned a while ago, let us talk about that as part of context development. So uh, we are losing people. A while ago, this was 130 plus, and now it's 123. I hope you did not just come here for attendance because that would be sad. All right. So, moving on to intertext. Moving on to intertext. So, intertext comes from the combination of the words inter, which means between or among groups, and text, which means written words in books, magazines, and whatnot. This is also derived from the Latin word intertexto, which means to intermingle while weaving. So, as stated, intertextuality is indeed something like that. So, to clarify that even more, uh, intertextuality, as you may figure out from just listening, is using another text as a reference to another work. This does not necessarily mean that citing sources immediately indicates intertextuality. So it's not always as literal as that. A literary work, for example, is not simply the product of a single author, but of that work's relationship to other texts and the structures of language itself. So any text is constructed as a combination of quotations, and those, of course, transform the meaning of other texts. As you may have noticed, references to other works can enrich the meaning of texts and therefore your own comprehension, because the more you know about different texts, the more you can see intertextuality. So, for example, if a text gives you the point of view of the experience of the people you never knew, you tend to become more understanding of their situation. That is why certain studies show that those who read more are kinder and more understanding compared to those who read less, since they are boxed in their own perspectives all the time. But of course, that's the general statement, even if it is statistically significant. So next, how do we manifest, or how does intertextuality manifest in the things that you read? In other sources, there might be other manifestations or forms of intertextuality. In fact, if you look at the learning activity sheet, there are others aside from these three. But the ones I will present you are these three. So we have appropriation, allusion, and parody. Let's talk about them one by one. Let's talk about them one by one. All right, we have the first one. Under appropriation, we have the process of adaptation where an old version of a work gets a new version of the work. So we are talking about reading and writing for now, but think of Disney movies where they are always churning out live action versions of the movies they already made 10 years ago, for example, to make money. So another point of appropriation is borrowing or referencing details from another text as a literary tool. So there can be reinterpretations of old works into new meanings and perhaps reimagining an existing text and making it new. You see this a lot in comic books, for example. For example, Batman used to not have guns and used to have guns and now he has gun. Used to have guns and now he has no guns. So to make this clearer, here are some examples. All right, I have here an example. I don't know if you are familiar. So for example, we have here a reinterpretation of the story of Hades and Persephone from Greek mythology, I think. I hope I'm not mistaken about that. So they do this a lot in mythology. Reinterpretation, I mean. That is why you have Percy Jackson and other stories because they are reinterpretation. So in this particular example, we have Hades and Persephone's situation interpreted as kidnapping in old stories, while in a reinterpretation, which could be a reimagining as well. If you're familiar with Lore Olympus, it's a webtoon. The webtoon makes their story become more wholesome rather than originating it from possible abuse. So that is one way to use intertextuality. So I have read Lore Olympus, but I haven't finished it since I don't have the motivation. But anyway, we have another one. You're familiar with Medusa, I think. So another reinterpretation coming from Greek mythology again is viewing Medusa as a victim instead of a monster. There are many essays that talk about this online. So when Medusa allegedly had an affair with the sea god Poseidon, the goddess Athena punished her. She turned Medusa into the monster that we know today, making her hair into snakes and turning anyone who looks into her eyes into stone. So the reinterpretation is that Medusa is the victim and that Poseidon is at fault here, considering that Athena did not punish Poseidon despite the god being equally participative if ever there was an affair. So there are even sources that say that Medusa was abused. Some sources also say that Medusa's new form is a gift to protect herself from men. So that is one way to reinterpret an old story. And of course, that is intertextual. I have here another example. If you watch Netflix, I'm sure you would be familiar. One more reimagining is Lucifer. So a biblical character banished for rebelling against God himself. Is God male? God. So Lucifer has gone under many different reimagining processes, but the most popular is his Netflix incarnation, I think, as a club owner in LA. Which was, of course, first reimagined by DC Comics and then adapted into a TV series. So this incarnation of Lucifer, I think it's showing now, makes him more empathetic and more capable of growth, unlike the biblical version where he is the representation of evil itself. So obviously, without other texts, these reimaginings and reinterpretations would not be possible. So let's move on to allusions. I think this is the most widely used when it comes to intertextuality. So allusions, which may be a figure of speech that you have encountered during your days in junior high school, if you went through junior high school. So an allusion, not an illusion, those are different. An allusion is simply put a reference to another text in the form of a person, place, or event. So in order for the allusion to make sense, you as the reader has to make the connection for it to work. Because if you're not aware that that's an allusion, it would be hard to make the connection. That is why allusions in novels are mostly missed by readers if they do not read or research a lot. However, simply making a reference to the person, for example, any popular person right now, is not an allusion. So there are certain types that you have to consider before you can classify a reference as an allusion. So I have here types of allusions. So an allusion may be literary, which takes its reference from another literary text, such as a novel, a short story, a play, or whatnot. It may be cultural, which is a reference from the time of the text, what has happened there. So most allusions are actually biblical because religion has a wide influence in written texts. All right. And finally, they can also come in the form of historical allusions where a historical event is referenced in the text. Remember that the purpose of such an intertextual element is to enrich meaning. So I have here more examples. All right, I'm sure you're familiar with this. Here you can see the lyrics to Taylor Swift's song. It's an old song entitled Love Story. I am not going to sing it for you, of course. You're not that special. But take note of Romeo. This is not simply a random name. Of course, this references Romeo from Shakespeare's tragedy Romeo and Juliet. The other parts of the song reflect Romeo and Juliet, their situations in the play as well. Are you disappointed that I did not sing this? So next. So here, is it showing? Yes, it is showing. Here we have a biblical allusion from Robert Frost's "Nothing Gold Can Stay." So obviously Eden is referencing the Garden of Eden from Genesis in the Bible to describe the impermanence of things. So just as how the existence of man in paradise was impermanent, Eden was used as a literary device in this particular example to demonstrate that even beautiful things will fade away. Natatawa ako sa comments. So, next. This is the last one. This is also an allusion. So, in this final example, we have "Oh Captain, My Captain" by Walt Whitman. You will not notice this from the excerpt, but the poem is a historical allusion to the death of Abraham Lincoln. Of course, we cannot discuss the entire poem here, so you will have to find out on your own. Or you can message your reading and writing skills teachers or any English teacher in general and ask for their help. The important thing is that such works are given more meaning because of its rich history and depth. All right. So finally, the last manifestation that I have here of intertextuality, which I have shared with you, is parody, which involves an imitation of a serious piece of literature, writing, art, or music, and exaggerates that this is important, exaggerates that imitation to the point of humor or comedy. Take note that satire and parody are different because parody is more focused on imitation and exaggeration rather than making a critique of society, which satire usually does. We have from Lovely Joy Balbero. That is one of my favorite poems. Are you talking about Oh Captain, My Captain? It is a good poem, and Whitman is a good poet. Regarding parody, sorry for that segue. Regarding parody, I really have no I was not able to find any examples of parody in literature. Most of them are satire. Most of the examples I am aware of are satire and not parody. So I turned to media instead. Here is the anime Gintama, which references a lot of other forms of animated media, such as Bleach, Dragon Ball Z, One Piece, Classroom, and many others, as you can see if you're familiar. So the comedic impact of these references would be lesser if you are not familiar with other anime, which just shows you how intertextuality is important in developing context and meaning. Because otherwise, the jokes would be meaningless. I can see fans of Gintama from the from the comment section. All right. Now, before we proceed with seeing your intertextuality identification skills, let us ask this question. Why should you care about intertextuality? Okay, some texts are related with others, but why does that concern you? So, type your answers below instead of asking me to do an impression of Goro Sensei. So type your answers as to why you think you should care about intertextuality. Again, why should you care about intertextuality? Will you benefit from it as an engineer, as a doctor in the future, as a lawyer, as a teacher? Or if you want to be a farmer, will it benefit you as a farmer? So what is the point of this entire discussion? Why did I speak here for 48 minutes? What is the point of this discussion? So may I read your answers as to why you think intertextuality is important? So while waiting for your answers, I would like to give a shout out to my technical team right now. The UMS English department for helping me out with my technicalities. From Jabez, shout out Shena Manjero. All right. So I'm still waiting for answers. All I see here are requests. So, all right. I'll read your answers later. But to give you an answer, I think this is my own answer, of course. Why should I care about intertextuality? And in general, why should I care about reading in the first place? Aside from the fact that if you do not know how to read, it would be difficult to survive in this type of society. So let me answer this quote. Let me answer this quote. All right, we have an answer actually from Athalia from 11 STEM F. This enables you to see different sides and aspects of a context. From Pauline, understanding intertextuality could give you deeper knowledge. It could also provide different interpretations and give another context. So that is important for you as a student, of course. Intertextuality benefits you as a student. From Joniel RB Caparas, my student from 11 UMS B, understanding intertextuality leads to a much richer reading experience to use for future purposes. From Lawrence Bicaldo from 11 AADB, intertextuality is a powerful writing tool that shouldn't be overlooked. It opens new possibilities and perspectives for constructing a story. And, sorry, this will be the last one. From Shannon Fajardo, it is important for the reader and author to have a good communication and understand the depth of the text. So, those are correct, especially how you relate it to how you study, because mostly, of course, reading and writing is related to studying. It will intertextuality will benefit you in a long way, in the long run, because the more you know, the better you understand. But to tackle the emotional side of the importance and to know why you should value reading and intertextuality and reading as an extension, let me quote the late Robin Williams through his character Mr. Keating from Dead Poets Society. In the film, he says, "We don't read and write poetry because it's cute. We read and write poetry because we are members of the human race. And the human race is filled with passion. In medicine, law, business, engineering, these are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for." To quote from Whitman, "O me, O life, of the questions of these recurring, of the endless trains of the faithless, of cities filled with the foolish, what good amid these, O me, O life? Answer, that you are here, that life exists, an identity, that the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse. That the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse. What will your verse be?" So that is the quote. So out of that passion comes the desire for connections and a united consciousness, I guess, among the human race. Isn't it frustrating to have differing views with other people, which causes them to, of course, fight each other? But uh, dealing with more creative works, why do we cry because of tragic stories? Speaking of tragic stories, I just watched Demon Slayer, the movie, and pirated it. Uh, so, yeah, tragic stories. Why do we feel sad from a cluster of words on a piece of paper? These characters, as far as we are concerned, these characters are not real. But that is where we would be wrong. Because these characters are you. These characters and words are a product of human progress, spanning hundreds and thousand years of suffering, of living. The consciousness that you have today is the product of all those efforts. The intertextual connections that you can appreciate now is a product of that rich history. So do not waste it. Anyway, I think we're running out of time. It's time to test your intertextuality intertextuality detection skills. So I have here statements. You are expected to type your answers on how the statements I will show you contain intertextual elements. So, for example, what does it reference and what meaning does the sentence have because of that reference? You have to answer those questions. Again, what does it reference and what meaning does the sentence have? So, let's begin with the first one. Uh-huh. Let's begin with the first one. This is the first sentence. Find out the intertextual element. Here is the first everyday statement that you can hear from people. He was a good Samaritan yesterday when he helped the lady start her car. Type your answers. Again, he was a good Samaritan yesterday when he helped the lady start her car. What does it reference? What meaning does it have? All right, I will be waiting for your answers. So I'll read first several answers about why intertextual is important. Intertextuality is important. So from Moises Atienza, it is important because it makes you understand the piece better and to answer your assessment easier. All right, we have an answer from Athalia from STEMF, who answered a while ago as well. The allusion is that a good Samaritan is a good man. All right, we have another answer from Sean Marco Viray. The intertextual element is an allusion, which is the Good Samaritan. The Good Samaritan is a biblical allusion as it tells a story of a Samaritan who helped a person in need. So every time you mention Good Samaritan, this is actually a biblical allusion because it references an event in the Bible. So Good Samaritan does not necessarily mean because if you take Good Samaritan literally, it will mean something else. But if you take into account the biblical allusion, it contains a different meaning. Next one. Here is the second statement. She turned the other cheek after she was cheated out of a promotion. Type your answers. Again, she turned the other cheek when she was cheated out of a promotion. What does it reference? What meaning does it have? So let us read your answers. So a while ago you answered allusion for the Good Samaritan and a lot of you are correct. So thank you for the 106 people watching here with us at this ungodly hour. So I'm waiting for what the allusion is in terms of this statement. She turned the other cheek after she was cheated out of a promotion. Is there an allusion in this everyday statement? Because the expression that you have here, for example, turn the other cheek is, if you interpret this literally, she turned her cheek after she was cheated out of a promotion. So she turned her head sideways. And of course, that sounds absurd. That sounds too literal. So what does this statement really mean if we consider intertextuality? I am not yet seeing answers, but somehow we are getting more viewers. From 110, we now have 114. So thank you for the existence of those 4 people. And now we're back to 110. So still no answers. She turned the other cheek after she was cheated out of a promotion. So, all right, from Shireen K. Mangaran, the allusion is to forgive someone who has wronged you. All right, that is correct. The allusion is to forgive. When you say turn the other cheek, that means to forgive someone or to not fight back. So from Sean Viray again, you are very active. Congratulations. The intertext textual context is an allusion, which is turning the other cheek. It is a biblical allusion referring to the Sermon of the Mount. And of course, in the Sermon of the Mount, the one who spoke was Jesus Christ. And what did Jesus Christ say regarding how we treat our enemies? If someone slaps you on one cheek, you turn the other cheek and let him slap it. So that is somehow the teaching of not giving revenge, just like what Trixie here says from 11 stem H. It is a biblical allusion that comes from the teaching of Jesus that you should not get revenge. So that is what turning the other cheek means. It is now 4 o'clock. I will proceed with the next one. You are a Solomon when it comes to making decisions. You are a Solomon when it comes to making decisions. So please type your answers. So you have two questions to answer here. What does it reference? And what meaning does it have? But while waiting for your answer, since I think there is a delay, from Isabella Aguinaldo from 11 STEM H. Hi. So the biblical allusion to the Sermon of the Mount relating to revenge and how you should not do it, of course. Regarding the prior answer from Dayanara from 11 STEM B. Most of the students I see here are from 11 STEM, 11 ABM. That's nice. Where are my students? So, allusion from Dayanara. I think turn the other cheek means she just ignored it. That is partly the meaning, but of course when you say allusion, it has to be related to a literary or biblical reference, which means someone else said it biblically. All right, from Shireen Mangaran again. So the allusion is that in here in the third, what number example is this? Is this the fourth? It refers to King Solomon, who was given a great wisdom by God. I forgot the story. Shame on me. But I think the story was that King Solomon split something into two as the decision. But I forgot what it was. I need to reread the Bible again. I need to reread the Bible. So from Lovely Joy Balbero, Solomon is a king known for his wisdom. So the text means he is also a wise decision maker. So from these are the same people. That's nice. You're staying with me. I'll read all of this. So from Isabella again, biblical allusion to Solomon who was given wisdom by God. From Niana, from 11 STEM H. STEM H is active. Biblical allusion, story of King Solomon. From Sean, the intertextual element is Solomon. It is a biblical allusion referring to the story of King Solomon, where King Solomon has been granted wisdom in order to make a difficult decision in figuring out who is the real mother of the baby. Did they split the baby? I forgot. All right. Thank you for your answers. That is nice. And I think this is the fourth. The last one was the third. I don't know how to count. So here's the fourth statement. It's been raining for 40 days and 40 nights. Of course, literally, you can interpret this as raining for 40 days and 40 nights while counting. So type your answers. Again, you are You Are a Solomon is a while ago. So it's been raining for 40 days and 40 nights. So what does this reference and what meaning does it have? So let us read your answers once you're done, but let me read answers from a while ago. From Maureen, Biblical Allusion, Unselfish and Wise, Dayanara, King Solomon is a wise decision maker, and that means you are wise as well if you say that to someone. No. That the person you are talking to is wise as well. Alright, from Russell, James Balastige, biblical allusion to the great flood that occurred during the time of Noah. So from Pauline, Faith Evangelista, biblical allusion which refers to the reigning of 40 days and 40 nights in the story of Noah's Ark. From Sean, again, the intertextual element is a biblical allusion. It references the amount of time where Noah spent in his ark while the earth was flooded. And of course, as you may notice, all the examples are Bible examples because they're the easiest to find out. I mean, everyone probably has encountered the Bible in their lives. So that's why I gave these examples. So it's been raining for 40 days and 40 nights. Although it is a biblical allusion, the interpretation might be different because it does not literally mean it has been raining for 40 days and 40 nights. This might be an allusion to how, oh no, the world is ending. You can express it this way. The world is ending and we are not on the ark. So finally, we have the last statement. We have the fifth and final statement. These are lyrics from My Chemical Romance. I forgot the title of the song. We could be perfect one night and die like star-crossed lovers when we fight. Type your answers again. We could be perfect one last night and die like star-crossed lovers when we fight. What does this reference? What does it reference? What meaning does it have? Let us read your answers. But while you're typing your answers, let me read previous answers from the last example. From Angelica, biblical allusion, it refers to the story of Noah. From Corinne de Mesa, biblical allusion, story of Noah's Ark. You got the allusion, but I'm interested to how you would interpret someone saying it's raining for 40 days and 40 nights. Because if you hear that from someone, you'll probably interpret it literally, or you'll ask them, "What are you talking about? Why are you talking about rain for 40 days and 40 nights? That didn't happen." So there probably is a richer meaning behind it when someone says it, aside from the fact that there is a reference. So again, it might mean the end of the world. Or what else would it mean aside from the end of the world? So anyone who got this, we could be perfect one night and die like star-crossed lovers when we fight. Because I'll give you a clue. This is not a biblical reference anymore. But you should be able to find out, I think. All right. So from Sean, the first answer I'm seeing, same students. So the intertextual element is an allusion. Star-crossed lovers refers to Romeo and Juliet. That's correct. So when someone says star-crossed lovers, this is actually a reference to Romeo and Juliet, who were star-crossed lovers, meaning they aren't on the side of fate. So life is hard for them to get together. Yeah, the song is Lady of Sorrows by My Chemical Romance, I think. Thank you for telling me. All right. So that's my last example. So today, thank you. You have learned about context and what context is and how it helps you as a reader. You have also learned about intertextuality and how it appears in texts to develop context. So that's it for our reading and writing skills lesson. I hope you enjoyed your time, and even if you did not, I hope you learned something. So thank you for tuning in to Teleradyo Marcelo, ang telearalan ng bawat Malulenyo. This has been John Lester Zamora, your radio teacher for this afternoon. Thanks for tuning in to our series of reading and writing skills lesson. I learned. I hope you did. And until we meet again. So thank you and goodbye. Ay. Thank you po. Napalat na po ako. Thank you po.
Makinig, manood, nasa teleradyo. Makinig, manood, nasa teleradyo. Teleradyo, Teleradyo Marcelo. Sa gitna ng mapanubok na panahon, magkahalin sa kakibat ay diskusyon. Sama-sama tayo, kahit magkalayo. Sa programang ito, tiyak ang pagkatuto. Teleradyo, Teleradyo Marcelo.